My family sent a group text kicking me out of their lives while I was sick with pneumonia. They wanted space from the woman who paid all their bills. So I made one phone call to my lawyer, stopped the direct deposits, and set a legal trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fever had finally broken, but it left a damp, clinging chill in its wake. I was propped up on a mountain of pillows in my living room, the world outside a muted gray through the rain-streaked windows. Pneumonia had hollowed me out, leaving me weak and breathless. Even lifting the mug of tea to my lips felt like a monumental effort. My phone, which had been silent for most of the day, buzzed weakly on the side table. I reached for it, expecting a message from my assistant with an update on the firm. Instead, I saw a new group chat notification. The participants were my sister, Sarah, her husband, Mark, and our Uncle David. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a feeling entirely separate from the illness that gripped my body. I tapped the screen. The message was brutally short, a sterile sentence that felt more like a corporate directive than a family communication. Isabella, after much discussion, we've decided that we need space from you. Please don't contact us again. I read it once, then twice. My mind, foggy with fever and medication, struggled to process the words. Space. Don't contact us. It made no sense. I was the one who had been isolated for 2 weeks, confined to my home, too sick to even speak on the phone for more than a few minutes. I was the one who needed them. I had texted Sarah just yesterday, telling her I was finally feeling a little more human. Her reply had been a simple thumbs-up emoji. I had thought it was because she was busy with her art. Now I saw it for what it was, a dismissal. The message was from Sarah's number, but the language was all Mark. The cold, detached phrasing was his signature. He was a man who spoke in buzzwords and empty business jargon. He had always resented me, always viewed my support for Sarah as a personal slight against his own ability to provide, though his ability had never materialized into anything tangible. Uncle David's inclusion was the final twist of the knife. He had always been the family mediator, the gentle peacemaker. His silence in the chat was his consent. This was a united front. I leaned my head back, the pillows suddenly feeling like rocks. A dry, ragged cough tore through my chest, each tremor sending a sharp pain through my ribs. They had chosen now, when I was at my most vulnerable, to deliver this blow. When I was physically incapable of driving to their house, of looking them in the eye and demanding an explanation. They had done it from a distance, with the cowardly efficiency of a text message. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the screen of my phone blurring. The betrayal felt sharper than the pain in my lungs. The hours after the text message bled into one another in a haze of disbelief and a dull, throbbing ache. The world shrank to the 4 walls of my living room. I didn't reply to the message. What could I possibly say? Okay. Why? Any response felt both inadequate and humiliating. They had drawn a line, and my pride, even in my weakened state, refused to let me beg for an explanation. The silence from my phone was deafening, a constant reminder of the door they had slammed in my face. The next afternoon, as I was forcing myself to eat a bowl of soup, my phone rang. It was Uncle David. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Against my better judgment, I answered, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Hello." "Isabella," he said, his tone clipped and devoid of its usual warmth. "I trust you got the message." "I did," I managed to say. "Good. I'm just calling to let you know I'll be stopping by later to pick up a few things from your garage. Sarah left her old easel and some canvases there last year, and Mark wants his golf clubs." I was stunned into silence. Not only were they cutting me off, but they were also sending an emissary to collect their belongings, as if this were a formal divorce. They were tidying up the loose ends of our relationship. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. These were items I had been storing for them for years, happy to do so. Now, they were being reclaimed like assets in a liquidation. "The garage will be open," I said, my voice flat. I couldn't muster any other response. "Thank you," he said, and then, after a slight pause, "We think this is for the best." He hung up before I could reply. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly. This was a coordinated, calculated act. They had planned this. As I sat there, the soup growing cold in front of him, a different feeling began to surface beneath the layers of hurt, a slow-burning anger. It was a cold, clear anger that cut through the fever fog. I looked around my home, at the architectural awards on the shelves, at the blueprints for my latest project spread across the coffee table. I had built my life from nothing, through discipline, hard work, and an unwavering focus. And I had shared the fruits of that labor willingly, happily. I thought of the house they lived in, the beautiful four-bedroom colonial with the big backyard where my niece and nephew played. I had helped them buy it 5 years ago. My gaze drifted to a framed photo on the mantelpiece. The three of us, Sarah, myself, and our late mother, standing in front of that very house on the day they moved in. In their haste to cut me out, they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who exactly had made that house possible. And more importantly, they had forgotten how. My relationship with Sarah had always been one of protector and protected. 10 years my junior, she was the artist, the free spirit, while I was the pragmatist. When our parents passed away within a year of each other, I was 28 and just starting my architecture firm. Sarah was still in college. I promised her she would never have to worry, that she could finish her degree and pursue her art without fear. It was a promise I kept. I paid for her tuition, her supplies, and the rent on her first apartment. I did it because I loved her, and because seeing her create beautiful things brought a light into my life that my structured, logical world often lacked. Then Mark entered the picture. He met Sarah at a gallery opening, sweeping her off her feet with grand pronouncements about his future in finance and his portfolio of disruptive investments. On the surface, he was charming. He wore polished shoes, a confident smile, and spoke with an authority that made you want to believe him. But I saw the cracks early on. His consulting firm was just a rented mailbox, and his investments were a series of short-lived, high-risk ventures that always seemed to fizzle out, taking his and Sarah's savings with them. I never said, "I told you so." Instead, when they were facing eviction, I helped them find a new place. When Mark's car was repossessed, I co-signed for a more sensible one. And when they had children and needed more space, I bought the house. It was my biggest gift to them, a foundation of security I desperately wanted for my sister. I never held it over their heads. My direct deposits to their account each month were automatic, a quiet lifeline that covered the mortgage, utilities, and property taxes. It was my way of ensuring Sarah and the children were safe, no matter what happened with Mark's latest scheme. But Mark saw my support not as a gift, but as a judgment on his own failures. I remember one Christmas dinner 2 years ago. I had just won a major contract for the firm. As we celebrated, Mark raised his glass. "To Isabella," he'd said with a tight smile, "for showing us all that as long as you have enough money, you never have to depend on anyone." The comment landed like a stone in the cheerful atmosphere. Sarah looked mortified, but she didn't say anything. She just squeezed his arm, a gesture of placation. I saw then how deeply his insecurity ran, and how he was beginning to poison Sarah's perception of me. He was reframing my love as control, my generosity as a weapon used to diminish him. He was building a case against me in my own sister's mind, and I, too busy running my firm and trusting in our history, had let him. For 2 more days, I allowed myself to grieve. I let the hurt wash over me, acknowledging the pain of their collective decision. But as the last traces of the pneumonia cleared, so did the fog of sorrow. It was replaced by an icy architectural precision. My mind, trained to see structures, systems, and stress points, began to analyze the situation not as a family tragedy, but as a problem to be solved. They wanted space. They wanted to sever ties. Very well. I would facilitate the cleanest break imaginable. On Monday morning, I walked into my home office, my steps steady for the first time in weeks. I bypassed my drafting table and went straight to the large, fireproof safe tucked away in the closet. I spun the dial, the soft clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Inside, beneath files of old contracts and passports, was a thick navy blue portfolio labeled Oakwood Family Trust. I placed it on my desk and opened it. The documents were all there, crisp and orderly. The deed to the house on 34 Oakwood Lane was there, with the owner listed not as Sarah or Mark, but as the trust. The trust's founding documents were there, listing me, Isabella Rossi, as the sole trustee. And the rental agreement was there, a document I had created with my lawyer years ago as a formality. It was a legal shield designed to protect the asset, the house, from any of Mark's potential creditors or legal troubles. Sarah and Mark had signed it, but I doubt they'd ever read the fine print. They just saw it as one more piece of paperwork in the home buying process. They had no idea that the mortgage payments I was making on their behalf were, in legal terms, rental payments being made to the trust I controlled. The direct deposits they relied on were technically me paying myself, ensuring the trust's books were balanced. It was a perfect, self-contained system. And they had just asked me to turn it off. My decision was instant. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. They had made an adult decision to cut me out of their lives, and they would now have to face the adult consequences of that decision. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my lawyer, Mr. Davies. "Isabella, good to hear from you. Are you feeling better?" he asked, his voice kind. "Much better, thank you, Alan," I said. "I have a business matter to discuss regarding the Oakwood Family Trust." I explained the situation calmly and concisely, leaving out the emotional turmoil. I told him about the text message and their request to cease contact. I then instructed him to do two things. First, to immediately halt all payments from my personal account to the trust's account, effectively stopping the rent. Second, to begin the standard legal process for non-payment, following the letter of the law and the terms of the rental agreement they had signed. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Are you certain about this, Isabella?" Alan asked gently. "They asked for space, Alan," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I'm simply giving it to them." The next 3 weeks were quiet. I threw myself back into my work, the familiar comfort of deadlines and design challenges serving as a balm for my wounded heart. Uncle David had come and gone, silently loading the easel and golf clubs into his truck while I watched from an upstairs window. There was no further communication. It was as if a part of my life had been surgically, if brutally, removed. I began to adjust to the new silence, finding a strange peace in it. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. My breath caught in my throat. I let it ring twice before answering, schooling my features into an expression of calm neutrality even though no one could see me. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my tone even. "Isabella, what is this?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. There was none of the casual cruelty from the text message. This was raw fear. "We got a letter, a formal notice from some law firm, Davies and Associates. It says we failed to pay rent and we're in arrears. It's a mistake, right? You need to call them and fix this." I took a slow, deliberate breath. "It's not a mistake, Sarah," I said calmly. "There's nothing to fix. You all asked me not to contact you and to give you space. I honored that. I stopped all my involvement in your lives, and that included the direct deposits that paid the rent on the house." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. "Rent? What are you talking about? We own this house. You're trying to trick us." Suddenly, a different voice, laced with fury, came on the line. It was Mark. "You can't do this," he yelled, his voice cracking. "This is our home. We have equity. You're trying to steal it from us after everything we've put up with from you." His audacity was breathtaking. The years of my support, my generosity, were now something they had put up with. The cold anger I had felt before returned, sharp and clear. Mark, let me be very clear, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone that I used with incompetent contractors. You don't own anything. The Oakwood Family Trust owns the house. You are tenants. You signed a rental agreement 5 years ago. Your failure to pay constitutes a breach of that agreement. That's nonsense. It's a lie, he shouted, but the conviction in his voice was already faltering, replaced by a thin veneer of bluster. He was out of his depth. Legal documents and consequences were real. They weren't like the vague, imaginary profits he was always chasing. Threats and yelling won't change the legal facts, Mark, I said, my patience gone. If you have any further questions, you can direct them to my lawyer. His name and number are on the letterhead. Goodbye. I ended the call before he could respond. My hand was steady as I placed the phone back on the counter. The first crack in their new, independent life had appeared, and it was exactly where I knew it would be. Mark's desperation manifested as a flurry of angry, rambling texts. They were a bizarre mix of threats, insults, and pleas, accusing me of being a manipulative monster 1 minute and begging me to see reason the next. I read them, deleted them, and did not reply. As I expected, he tried to solve the problem the only why he knew how, by trying to secure money against an asset he didn't own. Mr. Davies called me a week later. Just as you predicted, Isabella, he said. Mr. Thompson tried to secure a home equity line of credit. He was, shall we say, quite embarrassed when the bank's title search showed the property was owned by the trust. The bank manager called me directly, as the trust's legal representative, to report the attempted fraud. The case against them was building itself. My instructions had been to simply follow the law, and in doing so, Mark's true character was being laid bare. Mr. Davies proceeded to the next step, sending the official notice of eviction by certified mail. The clock was ticking. 2 days after the eviction notice must have arrived, Sarah called again. This time, she was alone and she was crying. Isabella, please, she sobbed. I don't understand any of this. Mark said you were just trying to scare us, that this was some power play, but he went to the bank and they laughed at him. He won't tell me what's happening. He just keeps shouting about how you've ruined him. We got another letter today. It says we have to be out in 30 days. Is that true? Are you really kicking us out, your own family? The note of defense for Mark was still there, a flicker of loyalty in her confusion. She was still trapped in the narrative he had spun for her. It was time to give her the truth, in a form she couldn't ignore. Sarah, I said, my voice softening slightly. This was my sister, after all. I'm not kicking you out. You are being evicted for non-payment of rent according to the law. There is a difference. You and Mark chose to sever our relationship. That choice had financial consequences you didn't anticipate. But the house, we thought it was ours, she whispered. I know what you thought, I replied. Now I want you to know the facts. Check your email in 5 minutes. I am sending you a copy of the property deed in the trust's name and a copy of the rental agreement you both signed. It's all there. The house has always been mine, held in trust. The money I sent every month was to keep a roof over your head and the heads of my niece and nephew. Now, I suggest you get your own lawyer. Have them contact Mr. Davies to arrange the terms of your departure. I sent the email, attaching the scanned, undeniable documents. I pictured her opening them, the legal language confirming Mark's lies. The spell he had woven around her for years was about to be broken by the cold, hard weight of the truth. This was the second, more powerful confrontation, one waged not with angry words, but with irrefutable proof. The mediation was held in the large, wood-paneled conference room at Mr. Davies' law firm. The air was thick with tension. I sat on one side of the long mahogany table with Mr. Davies. On the other side sat Sarah, looking pale and lost, Mark, whose face was a mask of sullen anger, and a weary-looking Uncle David, who seemed to have been dragged along as a witness or moral support. Mark came in blustering, armed with a thin folder and a misplaced sense of confidence. He began by launching into a tirade about family loyalty and emotional distress, demanding that I sign the house over to them immediately as compensation for the trauma I had inflicted. I remained silent, letting him exhaust his talking points. When he finally wound down, sputtering about taking this to court, I gave a slight nod to Mr. Davies. My lawyer, Alan, calmly opened his own, much thicker folder. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice polite but firm, "let's dispense with the theatrics and look at the facts. Fact 1, the property at 34 Oakwood Lane is legally owned by the Oakwood Family Trust. My client, Ms. Rossi, is the sole trustee. Here is the certified deed." He slid a copy across the table. "Fact 2, you and Mrs. Thompson signed a legally binding rental agreement on this date 5 years ago. Here is the signed agreement." Another document slid across the table. "You have been in breach of this agreement for 63 days. Mark stared at the papers, speechless. Alan continued, his voice relentless. "Fact 3. On the 14th of last month, you attempted to secure a loan against this property, which constitutes bank fraud. I have a sworn statement from the bank manager right here." He placed another paper on the pile. "Furthermore, in doing our due diligence, we've uncovered 3 separate small claims court judgments against you from private individuals who gave you money for investment ventures that never materialized. It seems you have a history of misrepresenting financial situations." Uncle David audibly gasped. He looked at Mark as if seeing him for the first time. Mark's face went from red to a sickly white. His polished facade had not just cracked, it had disintegrated completely. But the final blow came from Sarah. She had been staring at the documents, her eyes moving back and forth between the cold, legal text and Mark's crumbling expression. I could see the years of his whispers, his manipulations, his poisoning of her mind against me, all falling away in the face of this stark, undeniable reality. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Mark. Her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of a final judgment. "You lied," she said. "You lied about everything." She then turned to me, her eyes filled with a profound, shattering regret. "Isabella, I am so sorry." Finally, she stood up and looked back at her husband, her expression now hard as stone. "We're done, Mark. Get out." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Her moment of realization was complete, and with those 3 words, she broke herself free. Mark stared at Sarah, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked to Uncle David for support, but our uncle was already pushing his chair back, a look of profound disappointment on his face. Defeated, Mark gathered his useless folder and walked out of the conference room without another word. His social and financial ruin was now absolute. After a moment, Uncle David cleared his throat. "Isabella, I had no idea. I am ashamed of my part in this." He looked genuinely remorseful. I simply nodded, accepting the apology without comment. He gave Sarah a final, pained look and left as well. The room was silent, save for the sound of Sarah's quiet weeping. I waited, giving her the space she had once demanded, but for a different reason now. When her sobs subsided, I spoke softly. "Sarah." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I let him twist everything. He made me believe your kindness was a cage. I was so wrong." "I know," I said, "but that's over now." In the end, I offered a simple cash-for-keys deal through Mr. Davies. I gave Sarah enough money for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment, on the condition that they vacate the house within 1 week. She accepted immediately, desperate for a clean break. The weeks that followed were filled with painful but necessary conversations. Sarah and I met for coffee, then lunch, slowly rebuilding the bridge between us. She told me about the subtle ways Mark had isolated her, convincing her that every act of my love was an act of control. I, in turn, apologized for not seeing how unhappy she was, for being too absorbed in my own world to notice the poison spreading in hers. She started taking commissions for her art again, her talent reawakening now that it was no longer smothered by Mark's resentment. She was starting over, and for the first time in years, she was doing it on her own terms. A few months later, I sold the house on Oakwood Lane. Standing in the empty rooms before the final walkthrough, I felt a sense of peace. The painful memories were still there, but they no longer had any power. The house was just a structure of wood and plaster, and I was an architect. I knew better than anyone that sometimes you have to tear down a faulty structure to build something stronger in its place. Our family was no different.